My husband from a wealthy family threw a paternity test report at me, proving that our son was not his, and cursed us mother and son as harbingers of bad luck. The next day, I held my son, who had been abandoned by the entire family, and knocked on the door of the rival family's wealthiest household. The one who opened the door was the heir of the richest family, disabled in both legs and known for his violent temper. Upon seeing my son's face, his eyes immediately reddened. "Sister, you're still alive? Ava, sign it." A divorce agreement, along with that thin paternity test report, was thrown in my face by my husband of 3 years, Evan. The sharp edges of the paper grazed my cheek, leaving a stinging pain. I didn't move, my gaze fixed on the glaring conclusion in the paternity report, excluding biological relationship. My 3-year-old son Nate was not Evan's. Nate in my arms was frightened by the scene, his small hands clutching my collar tightly, timidly calling out, "Daddy." Evan's eyes were ice-cold, devoid of any warmth. "Don't call me Dad, I don't have a bastard son like you from who knows where." His mother-in-law Madeline rushed forward from behind him, pointing at my nose and cursing loudly, "Ava, you shameless bitch. Our Gu family must have had 8 generations of bad luck to marry you. Not only do you not lay eggs, but you dare to cheat outside and bring back a bastard to impersonate our Gu family's grandson." Her words were like poisoned knives, stabbing into my heart one by one. I looked up at the man I once thought was my good husband, my voice hoarse. "Evan, do you believe me?" We had been married for 3 years, he was gentle, considerate, and protective toward me. After Nate was born, he spoiled our son to the heavens. I couldn't believe that all of this was fake. Evan sneered, his eyes full of disgust and contempt. "Believe you? Ava, the evidence is right in front of us, what else do you want to quibble about? You make me sick. I really regret how I could have been blind to fall for a promiscuous woman like you." Standing beside him was his childhood sweetheart, Luna. She was wearing a pure white dress, with exquisite makeup, and at that moment, she was looking at me with a gaze of pity mixed with triumph. "Brother Evan, don't say that about sister-in-law, maybe there's some misunderstanding?" She spoke softly, but it was like adding fuel to the fire. "Sister-in-law, Nate is still young, how could you make such a mistake?" Mother-in-law Madeline quickly pulled Luna behind her, looking at me as if I were garbage. "You vicious woman, don't even think about quibbling. Luna is the daughter-in-law recognized by our Gu family. You and your little bastard, get out of the Gu family right now, immediately." As she spoke, she tried to snatch Nate from my arms. "Don't touch my son." I reacted like a cat whose tail had been stepped on, abruptly stepping back and holding Nate tightly in my arms. Nate was scared and started wailing, his small body trembling nonstop in my arms. "Mommy, I'm scared." My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a large hand, hurting so much that I could barely breathe. This was the family I had given everything to love. In their eyes, my son and I were worth less than stray dogs on the roadside. Evan looked at us mother and son with no trace of pity on his face, only impatience. "Ava, stop acting out this pitiful drama here. For the sake of our marriage, sign it, and I'll let you leave with nothing. Otherwise, don't blame me for being ruthless and ruining you and your bastard's reputation. Leave with nothing. When I married him, my parents gave me a house in the city center, a car, and 5 million in dowry. Now, he wanted me to get out." I looked at his cold face and suddenly laughed. "Fine." Holding Nate, I walked to the coffee table, picked up the pen. My hand was steady as I signed my name, Ava. From today onward, this name had no further connection with the Gu family. Holding Nate, I took nothing and walked step by step toward the door. As I passed by Evan, I stopped, looked up at him, and said word by word, "Evan, you will regret this." He looked as if he had heard the biggest joke, his face full of disdain. I didn't look at him again, holding my son, and walked out of this cage I once thought was my home. Stepping out of the Gu family villa's gate, the sunlight outside stung my eyes painfully. Nate sobbed softly in my arms. "Mommy, where are we going? Doesn't Daddy want us anymore?" I kissed his sweaty forehead and said softly, "Nate, be good, Daddy is sick, we won't disturb him. Mommy will take you to find people who truly care for us." I hailed a taxi and gave an address. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, somewhat surprised. "Miss, are you sure you're going to the Hua family mansion? That's not a place ordinary people can enter." I confirmed. The Hua family was the true top wealthy family in the city and also Evan's arch rival in business. Evan had gnashed his teeth more than once in front of me mentioning the Hua family's heir, Julian. He said he was a crippled madman with a violent temperament and ruthless methods, the Gu family's biggest enemy. Everyone said to provoke anyone but Julian. But today, I was determined to provoke him. The taxi stopped in front of the Hua family mansion's gate, which resembled a castle. Holding Nate, I got out, took a deep breath, and rang the doorbell. A vigilant male voice came from the intercom. "Who are you looking for?" "I'm looking for Julian." "Do you have an appointment?" "No." I paused, looking at Nate's face in my arms that resembled someone, and added, "Tell him an old acquaintance has brought his relative to see him." The other side was silent for a long time, so long that I thought there would be no response. Just as I was about to ring again, an indifferent voice came from the intercom. "Wait." The heavy iron gate didn't open. After waiting about 10 minutes, a side door of the villa opened a crack, and a butler-like person came out, sizing me up with eyes full of suspicion. "Our sir doesn't know any old acquaintances, please leave." I didn't leave, just stared at him steadily. "Have him take a look at my son himself, he'll want to see me." The butler frowned, seeming to think I was unreasonable. At that moment, a low, hoarse male voice with some impatience came from the intercom behind him. "Tell her to get lost." The voice carried a chilling ferocity. With the order, the butler's attitude became even firmer. "Miss, you heard that? Please leave immediately, or we'll call security." I clenched my fists. This was my last chance. I couldn't leave. I suddenly looked up and shouted loudly into the intercom in the butler's hand, "Julian! Don't you even recognize your sister's son?" The other end of the intercom fell instantly silent. Even the butler was stunned, looking at me as if I were crazy. After a few seconds, that hoarse male voice sounded again, this time with a barely noticeable tremor. "Let her in." The butler was shocked but still opened the side door. Holding Nate, I walked into this mysterious and heavily guarded Hua family mansion. Passing through the neatly trimmed garden, I was led to a villa. The living room door was wide open. At a glance, I saw the man sitting in the center of the living room. He was in a wide wheelchair, covered with a thin blanket, his face handsomely almost ethereal, but pale without a trace of color. A pair of deep eyes were staring fixedly at me, surging with complex emotions I couldn't understand. This was Julian. The rumored violent crippled madman. His gaze finally landed on Nate in my arms. Nate was a bit scared and buried his face in my neck. I gently patted his back and said softly, "Nate, don't be afraid, look at Uncle." Nate hesitated, slowly turned his head, his big black eyes curiously looking at Julian. The moment he clearly saw Nate's face, Julian's whole body trembled violently. He stared fixedly at Nate's face, and those eyes filled with gloom and ferocity gradually turned red. His hands on the wheelchair armrests had knuckles turning white from force, veins bulging on the back. The air seemed to freeze. After a long time, he laboriously turned the wheelchair, approaching me bit by bit. His gaze slowly shifted from Nate to my face, his voice hoarse beyond recognition, with a heavy nasal tone and incredulous tremor. "Sister, you're still alive?" That one word sister made my tears burst forth instantly. Holding Nate, looking at this brother who was much more mature than in my memory, I sobbed uncontrollably. "Julian." He reached out, wanting to touch me, but as if afraid everything before him was an illusion, his hand stopped in midair, trembling slightly. "Sister, is it really you?" I nodded vigorously, tears blurring my vision. 20 years had passed. When I was abducted, I was only 5 years old, and my memories of home were already vague. I only remembered having a brother 2 years younger than me, who always followed behind me, sweetly calling me sister. I remembered he had a very small red mole between his eyebrows. And the man before me prominently had an identical red mole between his eyebrows. After I was abducted, my adoptive parents treated me fairly well, but the family was poor, so I dropped out early to work. Later, I met Evan, thinking I had found a good man to entrust my life to, so I buried the thought of searching for my biological parents and brother deep in my heart. I thought I might never see them in this lifetime. Until Evan threw that paternity report in my face. Until I saw Nate's face becoming increasingly clear, strikingly similar to my father's in my memory. Only then did I suddenly realize. Nate was not Evan's son, he was the bloodline of the Hua family. He was my brother's, Julian's, biological nephew. Julian's eyes were red, he grabbed my hand with such force as if he wanted to merge me into his blood. "Sister, where have you been all these years? We've searched for you for 20 years. Mom and Dad, they thought you had already." He couldn't continue, his voice choking. I shook my head, tears surging. "I don't know. I was abducted by human traffickers, later adopted by a couple. I thought I could never come back." Human traffickers. Julian's eyes instantly burst with terrifying killing intent, as if the temperature in the entire living room dropped. "I won't let them go." He took a deep breath, trying to calm his emotions, his gaze falling on Nate again, becoming incredibly soft. "What's his name?" "Nate, Nate. This is the nickname I gave him, and his formal name is the same. I always felt that somehow, I was missing something." "Nate." Julian murmured the name softly, the tenderness in his eyes almost overflowing. "Good name." He extended his hand toward Nate. "Nate, come here, let Uncle hold you." Nate looked at me, and seeing me nod, he cautiously wriggled out of my arms and walked to Julian. Julian lifted him onto his lap and held him tightly. This man, seen by outsiders as violent and ruthless, was now holding my son, his shoulders trembling slightly. He buried his head in Nate's small neck, like a beast that had found its lost cub, emitting suppressed whimpers. Watching this scene, my heart felt both sour and soft. After a long time, Julian lifted his head, he had regained his composure, though his eyes were still red. He looked at me and said solemnly, "Sister, from today on, this is your home. No one will bully you mother and son again." His words gave me infinite strength and peace of mind. The butler standing aside was completely stunned. He never imagined that this woman who came knocking with a bastard in her arms was actually the Hua family's missing eldest daughter for 20 years. And that so-called bastard was the legitimate next generation of the Hua family. Julian immediately instructed the butler, "Henry, go clean up the west courtyard right away and move my sister and Nate's things in. Also, investigate. 20 years ago, everyone and everything related to my sister's disappearance, don't let a single one go." "Yes, sir." Henry responded respectfully, his gaze toward me changing from suspicion to awe. At that moment, my phone rang. It was Evan calling. I looked at the name, my eyes cold, and hung up directly. But he persistently called again. I frowned, about to turn off the phone, but Julian held my hand. "Answer it," he said coldly. "I want to hear what this man who bullied my sister has to say." I pressed the answer button and put it on speaker. Evan's furious voice immediately came from the receiver. "Ava. Where the hell are you? Did you take that bastard to find Julian?" His information was quite timely. Before I could speak, Julian sneered and said into the phone, "Evan, are you looking for my sister?" The other end of the phone instantly went quiet. After a few seconds, Evan's incredulous voice sounded, "Julian? How could Ava be with you? Your sister?" "That's right." Julian's voice carried bone-chilling coldness. "Ava is my biological sister, lost for 20 years. The bastard you just mentioned is my biological nephew, the heir of the Hua family. Now, do you understand?" The other end was deathly silent. I could imagine how spectacular Evan's expression must be at that moment. The bastard he abandoned had transformed into his archenemy's biological nephew, the golden grandson of the Hua family. This was more humiliating than slapping his face directly. "Impossible, this is absolutely impossible." Evan's voice was sharp as if roaring. Ava is just a poor orphan, how could she be your sister? Julian, to deal with me, you even make up such lies? Lies? Julian sneered. Evan, you'll soon know if this is a lie. By the way, he changed the topic, his tone sinister, you just said you made my sister leave with nothing? And called my nephew a bastard? Evan was at a loss for words. Very good. Julian said word by word, Evan, you and your Gu family, prepare to bear the wrath of my Hua family. After saying that, he hung up directly. I looked at him, feeling a surge of satisfaction. Julian, thank you. Sister, between us, no need for thanks. He looked at me with firm eyes. Before, I didn't have the ability to protect you, now, I won't let anyone bully you again. He paused and asked again, Sister, that paternity test, what's the story? Mentioning this, my face darkened. I don't know. Nate, Sister, you don't need to say, I believe you. Julian interrupted me. I also believe Nate is our Hua family's child. This face is exactly like father's when he was young, it can't be wrong. He looked at Nate with incredibly gentle eyes. As for that test, I'll investigate it clearly. Whoever dares to mess with my Hua family, no matter who, I'll make them pay. At that moment, an untimely voice sounded. Julian, guests have come to the house, why didn't you tell your second uncle? A man around 50 slowly walked down from the second floor, wearing a tang suit, twirling 2 walnuts in his hand, with a smile on his face, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He was Julian's second uncle, Samuel. The warmth on Julian's face disappeared instantly, returning to that cold, unapproachable demeanor. Second uncle. He called faintly. Samuel's gaze fell on me, then looked at Nate on Julian's lap, a glint flashing in his eyes. Who is this? My sister, Ava. Julian was concise. The surprise on Samuel's face was just right, sister? The Ava who went missing back then? Oh, this is truly great news. Ava, you finally returned. He appeared enthusiastic and kind, but I saw a flash of calculation in his eyes. Second uncle. Holding Nate, I stood up and called out neither humbly nor arrogantly. Ah, good child, you've suffered these years. Samuel said, his gaze turning to Nate again. This child is really handsome, carved from the same mold as Big Brother when young. Julian, now you have company. His words had implications, seeming to hint at something. Julian looked at him coldly, second uncle is right. My Hua family finally has an heir. Samuel's smile stiffened for a moment, then returned to normal. Yes, Big Brother and sister-in-law's spirits in heaven can rest in peace. As he spoke, he changed the topic, however, Ava has just returned, shouldn't we inform the clan elders about her identity? After all, missing for 20 years and suddenly back, there should be a procedure to avoid gossip from outsiders. He was questioning my identity. I clenched my fists. But Julian laughed, his smile ice-cold. Second uncle is right. However, whoever I, Julian, recognize as family, who dares to say a word of gossip? He looked at Samuel, his eyes sharp as knives, or does second uncle think there's something wrong with my sister's identity? Between the two, undercurrents surged. Samuel was choked for a moment, dryly laughing twice. Julian, what are you saying? Of course I believe you. Just. He changed the topic, looking at me with sharp eyes. Ava, it's not that second uncle doesn't believe you. But the Hua family is large and prosperous, everything must follow rules. You suddenly return with a child, claiming he's the Hua bloodline, there must be proof to silence the rumors, right? He revealed his true intentions. What do you want? Julian's voice was cold enough to drop ice shards. Simple. Samuel said leisurely, do a paternity test. Compare you and Nate with the blood sample left by your big brother. Once the results come out proving you are indeed the Hua bloodline, I, Samuel, will be the first to vindicate you and write your name back into the family tree. His words sounded righteous, but they were forcing me. My heart sank. Evan's test report was still vivid. Although I believed Nate was the Hua family's child, what if that test was real? What if Nate really wasn't? I didn't dare think further. Seeing my silence, the triumph in Samuel's eyes grew stronger. What? Ava, are you afraid? At that moment, a commotion came from outside the villa. Butler Henry hurried in, his face ugly. Sir, bad news. Gu family's Evan is here, with reporters, causing trouble at the door. Julian's face changed. But Samuel laughed. Oh, this is really lively. Julian, seems your trouble is not small. He looked at me, speaking leisurely. Ava, this person is your ex-husband, right? He's naming you, saying you cuckolded him, and the son you bore is a bastard. Now reporters are blocking the door. Your identity as the Hua family's eldest miss hasn't been recognized yet, and you're about to become the city's laughingstock. He gloated without hiding it. My body was ice cold. In front, Evan with reporters slandering outside, behind, Samuel eyeing covetously inside. Holding Nate, I felt like I was sandwiched between two beasts, unable to move. Julian looked at me and said solemnly, Sister, don't be afraid, I'm here. He turned to Henry, have security block them, drive the reporters away. Useless. Samuel shook his head. Evan came prepared this time, making such a big fuss to drag the Hua family down too. Now there are dozens of media outside, how to drive them? Julian, this matter started because of her, I think it's better to let her solve it herself. He pointed the spearhead directly at me. Let her go out, clarify with her ex-husband. Also let the reporters outside see that our Hua family is not a place to harbor dirt. His meaning was clear, to have me go out and be humiliated by Evan in front of all reporters. This way, whether my identity was true or false, the Hua family's face would be lost because of me. And he could use this opportunity to challenge Julian. Holding the shivering Nate in my arms, my hands and feet were cold, my heart sinking straight down. What should I do? Second uncle is right. Julian beside me suddenly spoke. I looked at him in shock. Samuel was also stunned, then showed a triumphant smile. Julian, good that you can think it through. But Julian didn't look at him, just turned the wheelchair to come in front of me. He looked up at me, those bottomless eyes showing no retreat, only reassuring firmness. Sister, are you afraid? I looked into his eyes, and that panicked heart miraculously settled. I shook my head. Not afraid. With him here, I feared nothing. Good. Julian smiled, that smile carrying world-destroying madness and arrogance. Then let's go out and meet them. He turned to Butler Henry, open the main gate, and bring that special gift I prepared for Evan. A glint flashed in Henry's eyes, he immediately bowed, yes, sir. Samuel's smile froze. He didn't expect Julian not only not to stop but to personally take me out and escalate the matter. This madman. The heavy and luxurious main gate of the Hua family mansion slowly opened. Outside, flashlights instantly lit up, countless reporters carrying cameras surged forward like sharks smelling blood. Evan stood at the forefront of the crowd. When he saw me, especially Julian beside me, a flash of panic crossed his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by resentment and madness. He pointed at me, roaring loudly at all the lenses, everyone look. It's this woman. Her name is Ava, my wife Evan. She didn't uphold wifely virtues, cheated outside, bore a bastard to impersonate my Gu family's descendant. Now, exposed by me, she shamelessly brings the bastard to rely on her adulterer. He pointed the spearhead directly at Julian. The reporters instantly boiled. Evan, is what you say true? Do you have evidence? Miss Ava, what is your relationship with Mr. Julian? Mr. Julian, are you really Miss Ava's son's father? Countless sharp questions smashed toward me like knives. Holding Nate, my face was pale, but my back was straight. Seeing me like this, Evan became even more triumphant. He pulled out that paternity report from his pocket, holding it high. The evidence is here. Black and white. This bastard has no blood relation to me at all. Flashlights flickered madly, recording this scene worthy of the year's biggest drama. At that moment, Julian sneered. He signaled the bodyguards behind him. The bodyguards immediately stepped forward, setting up a huge LED display at the door. The screen lit up. What appeared on it was a surveillance video. The video's location was a private hospital's identification center. In the footage, a woman in nurse uniform sneaked into the sample storage room and switched 2 samples. And that woman's face was clearly shown on the screen. Evan's expression instantly froze. Because he recognized that woman. It was Luna's cousin. The video continued. The scene switched to Luna and her cousin meeting in a cafe. Luna handed her a thick envelope, obviously filled with money. How did things go? Don't worry, Sister Luna, I switched Evan's blood sample with someone completely unrelated. When the results come out, that child absolutely can't be his. Good. Once he divorces that bitch Ava, brother Evan will be yours. The dialogue came out clearly. The whole scene was deathly silent. All reporters were stunned, their cameras all aimed at the ashen-faced Evan. The reversal came too fast, like a tornado. 1 second, the victim accusing his wife of cheating, the next, turned into a fool deceived by a green tea bitch and her family. Evan's whole body was shaking, he looked at the screen in disbelief, his lips trembling, unable to say a word. Evan. Julian's voice rose leisurely, with a hint of cruel smile. Now, do you still think my nephew is a bastard? He emphasized the word nephew. Evan suddenly came to his senses, he stared fixedly at Nate in my arms. If the test was fake, then this child he cursed as a bastard, abandoned, and personally pushed away, was his Evan's biological son. Moreover, Julian's biological nephew. A favored son who could let him climb both the Gu and Hua family's mountains at once. He had personally thrown away a gold mine. No. No. Evan's face was pale as paper, he looked at me, eyes full of regret and pleading. Ava, I was wrong. I was deceived by that bitch Luna. Ava, forgive me, let's remarry, okay? Nate is our son. He actually begged me to remarry in front of all reporters. How ridiculous. I looked at him coldly, saying word by word, Evan, from the moment you threw that report in my face, it was over between us. As for Nate, I lowered my head, kissed my son's forehead, he surnames Hua, is my Hua family's child. Has no relation to you, Evan. My words, like the last straw, completely crushed Evan. He knelt down with a thud, under countless lenses, crying bitterly. Ava, I really was wrong. Give me another chance. For Nate's sake, you can't do this to me. The reporters went crazy, shutter sounds ringing non-stop. Wealthy upstart toyed by green tea, abandons wife and son, regrets too late. Shocking reversal. Paternity test forged, ex-wife is arch-rival sister. I thought tomorrow's headlines were already booked by them. Samuel standing aside had an extremely ugly face. He originally wanted to see my joke, use the chance to suppress Julian, but unexpectedly, it became Julian's stage to display strength and crush opponents. Failed to steal the chicken, lost the rice. Julian was too lazy to give Evan even a glance, he turned the wheelchair, protecting me as we went inside. Sister, let's go home. Julian. Ava. Evan crawled up from the ground, wanting to rush over like crazy, but was firmly blocked by bodyguards. His eyes bloodshot, looking deranged. Nate is my son. You can't take him away. He's my son. Julian stopped, turned back, his eyes cold as knives. Your son? The one you cursed as a bastard, the one you and your mom drove out together? Evan, you're not worthy. After saying that, he ignored the farce outside and took me back to the villa. The heavy gate slowly closed, isolating all the clamor and ugliness outside. In the living room, Samuel's face alternated between green and white. He looked at Julian, smiling insincerely. Julian, you really have good methods. Silently solved everything. Second uncle flatters me. Julian said faintly. Dealing with some clowns doesn't require any methods. He implied something. Samuel's face became even uglier. Since Ava's identity has no issue, then the paternity test. Of course we do it. Before Julian could speak, I said first. Julian and Samuel both looked at me. I met Samuel's gaze calmly. Second uncle is right, everything must follow rules. Whether I am the Hua family's daughter, whether Nate is the Hua bloodline, a test can best explain. I don't want Julian to be criticized by the clan because of me. Saying this was both giving Samuel a step down and for myself. I wanted everyone to know clearly that I, Ava, am the legitimate eldest miss of the Hua family. My son Nate is the legitimate heir of the Hua family. Julian looked at me, a flash of approval and heartache in his eyes. He understood my meaning. Good. He nodded. Henry, arrange it. In the fastest way, I want to see the results within 24 hours. Seeing me so forthright, Samuel was somewhat in a dilemma, could only dryly laugh. Ava is understanding, second uncle was overthinking. A storm temporarily subsided. Julian took me to the west courtyard he had prepared for me early on. It was an independent two-story building, elegantly and warmly decorated, everything inside from furniture to curtains brand new. The children's room was filled with all kinds of toys, making Nate's eyes light up. Sister, you've been wrong these years. Julian looked at me, his voice full of guilt. It's all in the past. I shook my head. Julian, your legs. I had always wanted to ask but didn't dare. In my memory, my brother was a lively and healthy child. Julian's eyes dimmed, then returned to calm. 5 years ago, a car accident. He didn't say more, but I knew things were definitely not that simple. Was it an accident? He was silent for a moment, then slowly said, Sister, this matter is very complicated. You've just returned, rest well first. Leave the rest to me. Since he didn't want to say, I didn't pursue. We siblings reunited, there was plenty of time. The priority was that paternity test. Although I had 90% confidence, there was still a trace of unease in my heart. The shadow from Evan's report hadn't completely dissipated. The next afternoon, the results came out. Henry came in hurriedly with a file bag. In the living room, Julian and Samuel were both there. Everyone's gaze focused on that file bag. Henry respectfully handed the file bag to Julian. Julian opened the file bag and pulled out the report. His gaze lingered on the last page of the report for a moment, then slowly lifted his head. His face showed no expression. My heart instantly rose to my throat. Samuel couldn't wait to ask, Julian, what's the result? Julian didn't speak, just handed the report to me. I took it with trembling hands. My gaze directly fell on the final conclusion. Based on DNA analysis results, support that Ms. Ava is Mr. Lee's biological daughter. Based on DNA analysis results, exclude Mr. Lee as Mr. Nate's biological maternal grandfather. Boom, my brain went blank. I was the Hua family's daughter. But Nate wasn't. How could this be? If Nate wasn't the Hua bloodline, how to explain his face strikingly similar to my father's? Then Evan's forged report, wasn't it accidentally correct? My body was ice cold, the report in my hand was light, yet heavy as 1,000 pounds. Heh. Samuel let out a meaningful chuckle. This is really interesting. He stood up, walked in front of me, looking down at me with eyes full of sarcasm and triumph. Ava, what else do you have to say? You are indeed the Hua family's seed, but the child you brought back is a bastard of unknown origin. You deceived Julian, deceived the entire Hua family. What exactly are your intentions? His voice was stern. Holding Nate, I was speechless in defense. I didn't know how to explain. I looked at Julian, hoping he would believe me. But he just sat quietly in the wheelchair, his face calm, showing no joy or anger. My heart sank bit by bit. Second uncle, Julian finally spoke, his voice calm without a ripple. My sister just returned, tired from the journey, your loud voice will scare her. Samuel was stunned, seeming not to expect this reaction. Julian, now is not the time for this. This woman. I said. Julian interrupted him, his voice suddenly turning cold. She is my sister. No matter what happens, this point will never change. He turned the wheelchair to my side, reached out, gently covering my ice-cold hand back. Sister, don't be afraid. His hand was warm, that warmth flowing along my skin straight to my heart. I looked up at his firm eyes, my eye sockets heating up. Julian, I didn't deceive you. I really don't know what's going on. I know. He looked at me, his gaze gentle and inclusive. I believe you. Simple 3 words, yet more powerful than any explanation. Samuel's face turned blue with anger. Julian. You're crazy. The evidence is right here, and you still shelter her? She brought back a bastard just to scheme for our family's property. Scheme for property? Julian laughed, his laughter full of sarcasm. Second uncle, did you forget that my sister is herself the first in line to inherit the family property? Does she need to scheme? Samuel was choked speechless. According to Old Master Hwaswell back then, everything in the family was inherited by the eldest son Lee, that is, my and Julian's father. After father's death, it was inherited by his children. As the eldest daughter, I was indeed the first in line. Even so, this bastard can't stay in the family. He will become our family's shame. Samuel was still struggling finally. Shame? Julian's eyes instantly became terrifying. I'd like to see who dares say my nephew is a shame. He turned to Henry and instructed, Henry, investigate. Find out exactly which link went wrong in this test. Also, he paused, his gaze sweeping over the ugly-faced Samuel, investigate who leaked this news so quickly to second uncle. Samuel's face instantly turned white. He didn't expect Julian to suspect even him. Julian. What do you mean? I'm your second uncle. Precisely because you are my second uncle, I'm reminding you. Julian said coldly. Some people shouldn't stretch their hands too far. After saying that, he ignored Samuel, pushing me out. Sister, let's go for a walk in the garden. Under the sunlight, the flowers in the garden were blooming beautifully. Nate was chasing butterflies on the lawn, giggling. Watching his innocent smiling face, the haze in my heart wouldn't dissipate. Julian, that test. Sister, Julian interrupted me, do you think I'll believe that piece of paper or my own eyes? He pointed at Nate not far away. Look at him, those brows, that demeanor, exactly like father when young. If he's not the bloodline, it can only mean one thing. What? Our father, Lee, might not be Grandpa's biological son. His words were astonishing. I was shocked speechless by his bold guess. How is this possible? Why not? Julian sneered. The secrets hidden in this family are far more than you imagine. He looked at me, eyes profound. Sister, do you remember what happened the day you were abducted? I tried hard to recall. The memory was already vague, only some fragmented pieces left. I remember, that day was my birthday. Mom took me to the amusement park. Later, Mom went to buy me ice cream, told me to stand there and not move. Then a very kind aunt came over, said my mom was waiting over there, wanted to take me. I was taken by that aunt to a van, then I didn't know anything. Buy ice cream? Julian murmured, a chill flashing in his eyes. I remember, Mom was allergic to cold things, never touched them. My heart sank suddenly. Yes. How did I forget? Mom never ate ice cream, nor let us eat it. Then why did she go buy me ice cream that day? A terrifying thought emerged in my mind. Could it be? Sister, after you went missing, Mom and Dad used all connections to search for you, almost turning the whole city upside down. But strangely, all surveillance at the amusement park that day was broken. That ice cream stall also seemed to evaporate. Julian's voice was ice-cold and calm. Later, in less than half a year, Mom jumped off a building due to depression. After Mom's death, Dad's temperament changed greatly, drinking all day. 2 years later, he also died in the study from alcohol poisoning. Our originally happy family of 4, in just 3 years, fell apart, family destroyed and people dead. He looked at me, saying word by word, "Sister, don't you think all this is too coincidental?" My body shivered with cold, as if falling into an ice cave. I always thought my abduction was just an accident. Now it seemed this was fundamentally a meticulously planned conspiracy. A conspiracy targeting our whole family. Who? My voice trembled. Who did it? I've investigated for a long time. Julian's eyes surged with overwhelming hatred. All clues point to one person. Our second uncle, Samuel. This name exploded like thunder in my ears. How could it be him? He's Dad's biological brother. Biological brother? Julian sneered. In this family, kinship is the least valuable thing. Grandpa back then favored my father more, left everything to father. Samuel appeared respectful on the surface, but always jealous inside. When father was alive, he didn't dare do anything. But once father was gone. Julian's gaze fell on his own legs. 5 years ago, I found evidence of him secretly transferring company assets, prepared to expose him at the shareholders' meeting. The day before the meeting, I had the car accident. He thought I died, or would become a cripple, no longer a threat to him. But he didn't expect I survived. Looking at his disabled legs, my heart ached beyond measure. All this was done by Samuel. He killed my parents, crippled my brother, destroyed our whole family. Overwhelming hatred burned in my chest. This beast. I gritted my teeth, nails digging deep into my palm. Sister, rest assured. Julian patted my hand soothingly. His good days are over. These years, I've been secretly collecting his crimes evidence. Now, everything is ready, just lacking the east wind. That paternity test, he looked at me, is the east wind I sent him. I was stunned. You mean, that test is fake? No, the test is real. Julian shook his head. The result is also real. Then. Only, the sample sent for testing wasn't father's. Julian smiled, that smile ice-cold and sharp. It was extracted from the teacup Samuel used. I instantly understood. Nate wasn't Samuel's descendant. But Julian deliberately guided Samuel to think this test could be a weapon to attack me. His real purpose was to make Samuel lower his guard. He thinks I'm in disarray because of you, the best time for him to act. A flash of calculation in Julian's eyes. He'll act soon. Sure enough, as Julian expected. That night, Samuel, under the pretext of cleaning the house, convened the Hook clan elders to meet in the ancestral hall to discuss how to deal with me and Nate. He even invited lawyers, preparing to sue me on grounds of unknown origin, bringing back a bastard, intending to encroach on Hua family property. In the ancestral hall, lights were bright. The Hua family's elders gathered, each with solemn faces. Samuel stood in the center, holding that test report, speaking passionately. Dear uncles and elders, I, Samuel, convened everyone today for a matter concerning our Hua family's century-old reputation. This woman, Ava, left home 20 years ago, now suddenly returns with doubtful identity. She also brought a bastard, delusionally trying to impersonate my big brother's bloodline, encroach on my Hua family property. Her intentions are punishable. Today, in front of our ancestors, let's drive out this scourge and the bastard she brought, from the Hua family. He raised his arms and called out, looking righteous. Some unaware elders began whispering, looking at me with unkind eyes. Holding Nate, I stood aside, face calm. Julian sat in the wheelchair, even leisurely drinking tea, as if everything before him was just a farce unrelated to him. Seeing him like this, Samuel sneered inwardly. Death imminent, still putting on airs. He cleared his throat, preparing to announce the judgment. But the ancestral hall's gate was suddenly pushed open from outside. A group of uniformed police filed in. The leading officer showed his badge, voice loud. We received a report. Samuel is suspected of multiple intentional injuries, embezzlement, and a child abduction case from 20 years ago, now arresting him according to law. Samuel's face instantly lost all color. He looked at the police in disbelief, then turned back sharply, glaring at Julian. "It's you. Julian. You calculated me." Julian put down the teacup and smiled. "Second uncle, realizing now, isn't it a bit late?" He signaled Henry. Henry immediately distributed a thick stack of files to every elder present. "This is all evidence of Samuel these years embezzling company assets, hiring killers to harm people, and planning to abduct my sister, killing my parents." Julian's voice echoed clearly in the silent ancestral hall. "Dear elders, now, who do you think is the sinner of the Hua family? Who should be driven out of the Hua family?" The elders looked at the evidence in hand, faces changing greatly, looking at Samuel with eyes full of shock and anger. "Beast. You beast." A white-haired elder trembled with anger, pointing at Samuel and cursing. "Big brother treated you well, yet you did such heinous things. Samuel, you're unworthy of being human." Facing accusations from all sides, Samuel completely collapsed. He laughed madly like crazy, pointing at Julian. "Ha ha ha. Julian, you won." "You think you won? Let me tell you a secret." He looked at me ferociously. "This bastard is not our Hua family's bloodline at all. Do you know who his biological father is?" "Who?" My heart rose. "It's Evan." Samuel laughed crazily. "He's Evan's biological son. When Ava married Evan, I checked her background. I knew early she was Ava. To revenge the Gu family, and to trouble you, I bribed Luna to forge that paternity test. I wanted Evan to personally abandon his own son. I wanted you, this cripple, to raise your archenemy's son. Ha ha ha." His laughter echoed in the ancestral hall, especially piercing. I was struck by lightning, stunned in place. Nate, is Evan's son? That test, so from beginning to end, it was a setup. A huge scam where everyone was kept in the dark. The police took away the deranged Samuel. The ancestral hall was in disarray. The elders looked at me with complex eyes, finally turning into a sigh, silently leaving. The vast ancestral hall left only me and Julian, and Nate sleeping in my arms. "Sister." Julian came to my side, his voice with a hint of apology. "Sorry, I didn't know." I shook my head, interrupting him. "Not your fault. All this was like an absurd dream." I looked at Nate's sleeping face in my arms. He looked so much like my father, the Hua bloodline. But his real father was the man I hated most. Fate is truly ironic. "Sister, what do you plan to do?" Julian asked. I was silent for a long time. What to do? Tell Evan the truth, let him come rob Nate? No. I absolutely won't allow it. Nate is my son, only mine. Julian, this matter, I hope you keep it secret for me. I looked at him, eyes firm. I don't want Evan to know Nate's background. I don't want my son to have such a despicable, shameless father. Good. Julian agreed without hesitation. I'll listen to you. From now on, Nate is my biological nephew, the only heir of the Hua family. No one can change that. Looking at him, my heart filled with gratitude. Having such a brother is my greatest fortune in this life. After Samuel's downfall, Julian quickly controlled all power of the Hua group. The first thing he did was launch a full sniper attack on the Gu family's company. The capital-rich Hua against the already unstable foundation, stock plummeting due to scandal Gu, was simply a dimensional strike. In just a short month, the Gu group announced bankruptcy liquidation. Evan went from an infinitely glorious business upstart to a debt-ridden stray dog. All his properties and cars were seized by the court. Mother-in-law Madeline couldn't accept this blow, had a stroke and was paralyzed in bed. And the instigator Luna, for forging evidence and commercial defamation, was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Evan came to find me many times. He knelt before me, slapping his own face, crying bitterly in repentance, begging forgiveness. Ava, I know I was wrong. I'm not human. I shouldn't have believed that bitch Luna. Give me another chance, let's go back to the past, okay? I just looked at him indifferently. Evan, between you and me, the past is long gone. Ava, what about Nate? I want to see Nate. He is my. He's not. I coldly interrupted him. I had security drive him out. After that, he never appeared again. I heard, because of huge usury debts, his legs were broken, now begging under a bridge for a living. This is perhaps his retribution. Having resolved all enemies, my life finally returned to peace. With Julian's help, I found the couple who adopted me back then. Seeing me, they were excited to tears. I gave them a large sum of money for a peaceful old age, repaying their nurturing grace. As for the traffickers who abducted me back then, they were also found by people Julian sent. Waiting for them would be the law's severe punishment. All matters had conclusions. My heart also finally found its home.